Now, finally, it is hard to talk about climate variability at large scales and not mention the El Niño Southern Oscillation. ENSO is one of the world's best studied climate phenomena. It is a natural climate oscillation involving the ocean and the atmosphere along the equatorial Pacific, that is, along the equator between Southeast Asia and Central and South America. And this phenomenon has ample effects on weather around the globe. Now, to understand it, we need to first take a look at the normal or neutral situation. And this will require us to take a dive into the Pacific Ocean. So the equatorial Pacific Ocean is under the continuous influence of the westward blowing trade winds. They create wind stress on the warm surface waters, pushing them towards the west, where they create the West Pacific warm pool. Back in the eastern part of the basin, deep cold water is pulled to the surface to replace the surface waters that were dislocated by the winds, creating a region of cold water at the surface called the equatorial cold tongue. The resulting difference in surface temperatures along the equator then has repercussions on the atmospheric circulation above. So in the whirlpool region, the heat from the ocean is released in the atmosphere, fueling the vertical upward motion of moist air that creates 15-kilometer high cumulonimbus clouds and regular intense precipitations. The air that has now lost most of its humidity travels back east along the tropopause and descends in the eastern side of the basin, closing the atmospheric circulation loop such that the entire ocean atmosphere system is self-sustained. Now, what does this have to do with cocoa? Well, as it turns out, every few years, this system suffers disturbances, and these disturbances have consequences that ripple out much further than the equatorial Pacific region. During what we call El Niño events, the trade winds weaken, and so does their push on the surface waters. The warm waters of the Pacific warm pool travel partially back eastward, creating a warm anomaly at the surface in the central and eastern parts of the basin. And as the warm waters moves eastward, so does the entire atmospheric circulation cell we described earlier, radically modifying precipitation patterns. First, along the equatorial Pacific, and then in Australia, Southeast Asia, and Central and South America, and finally to many other more remote regions of the world, as atmospheric disturbances propagate through what we call teleconnections. And this is where we get to the relevance of ENSO to cocoa production. So El Niño years are associated to negative effects on cocoa production because of teleconnections, such as increased chances of heavy rains and floods in Ecuador and Peru that can knock flowers off and damage the trees, and drier than average conditions and forest fires in Indonesia and eastern Brazil, leading to longer-term losses in production. Now, some keen observers might have noticed that the maps we included here include no teleconnections with West Africa. While, as is the general wisdom in the cocoa community, there might be a link between strong El Niño events and bad weather resulting in low crops in West Africa, there just haven't been enough recorded such strong events to scientifically confirm this link yet. Nevertheless, because of its worldwide teleconnections, ENSO is a major source of seasonal climate prediction for many regions around the world. So it is very much well worth keeping a very close eye on.